Hello, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be talking about these concrete countertops that I poured for the outdoor kitchen. I'm going to do a two-part series on them. The first part to outline the process I use to prepare for the pour. So the framing, the rock face liners I use to give them the nice rock face edge they have. And then the second video I will go into details on how I did the pour, including the mixing, the pigments I use to dye the countertops, the finishing process I went through, and then how I sealed them. And so I'm using the Concrete Countertop Solutions products, specifically the Liquicrete product for countertops. It has built-in fibers, and it also has a mesh that you put in the countertop that gives it additional strength. So for my purposes and for this application, I felt that gave me the best chance to create a strong, durable concrete countertop that's going to be able to withstand the changing of the seasons. We get a lot of wind, a lot of rain, a lot of freezing. Winters here can get down into the -20s at times. And so I wanted something that gave me the best chance to ensure that these cracked the least and lasted the longest. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started and show you how I went about framing and forming these countertops. Okay, so before we get to pouring the concrete countertops, we need to get the cabinet ready to accept the cement board that's going to lay on top, and we are going to have an overhang so we can have some bar stools here. And so it's going to be about a 12-inch, maybe a 14-inch overhang, and I'm afraid that's too much just for the concrete to hang over by itself. So I am putting some metal supports, you can see right there, that I'm currently clear coating over there. But I'm stoning this, and I can't just mount those to the cabinet because the stone won't nicely go around it. So my solution is I'm putting some rough sawn cedar there and there, and then I'll be mounting the iron metal support to this board to support then the cement board that I am putting on top that the concrete will be poured on. So that's how we're getting this started. And so just to show you kind of how I'm doing this, again, I've marked out my locations of where I want the board to sit on each side. I've gone 2 feet in on each side for the supports to give that cedar board something to grip into. I've installed a couple green treated 2x4s inside of the cabinet there. So when I screw this cedar board on, there's something there for it to grip. And I'm going ahead and pre-drilling, and I'm using these black 4.5-inch screws that you can use as lag screw replacements. And I'm not using them really for strength, I'm using them more so for looks. They have a nice black finish, kind of a fatter head on them, gives it a little bit more style. So going with that, and that's it. And so once I get those on, then I'll use these black exterior screws to screw on the supports flush with the top of the cabinet, and we'll move on to the next step. So let's get to this. All right, so welcome back everyone. I got a little bit further, so you can see I got the cedar on and got those support brackets installed, and man, they do look good. I'm really happy with how those turned out, and went ahead and got this perma-base cement board laid on top, so I'm ready to kind of move on to the next part of the prep. So to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and get the cement board supported all the way around. And so I'm going to use these 2x4s and screw them onto the side of the cabinet, something like this, to support the overhang. As you can see, it slopes a little bit, so we'll put the 2x4 under there, and that'll push that up, fill that gap in. Do it on the other side, and then I'm going to run a 1x across this edge, screwing into the end of each of those, and then put a couple of vertical supports down to the ground to hold all that up, and that should secure the cement board in place. So let's get to that. Okay, got all my bracing in. I just put up 2x4 on the side, support the overhang, and then I did a 1x4 across this back here with some support legs. Should be good enough. There's not a tremendous amount of weight that's going to be here, so that should be good for what we need. All right, so getting some rain, so I'm going to hold off on getting the forms and stuff until it dries up a little bit. So we're going to move on to the next step, is to get the countertop ready for the sink opening. So we'll be doing a drop-in, well, I guess it'd be a undermount sink, but how you do this is we will cut a hole, drop the sink in, and then we'll actually pour the concrete on top of the sink. And so this is a template that came with the stainless steel sink we're going to use. It has different cut lines. I found that if I use the largest cut line here and then cut inside the line, it's going to be big enough for me to drop the sink in, but not big enough to where it's going to fall through. So basically what we're going to do is go ahead and trace, get it lined up so it's square, so that it clears my metal stud top plate that's here. It just clears that, and then that'll be the opening. And so I know my metal stud is 6 inches from this front edge, and so I'm going to draw a line there. We'll line this up with that, trace around it, and get it cut out. Let's get to it. Alright, here we go. Boom. Alright, so now the next step, we need to mark the location for the faucet knockout. And as I mentioned, I'm using Concrete Countertop Solutions forms and molds and all their accessories, using specifically the Liquicrete solution, and they have a knockout specifically just for the faucet, and that calls for a 2 5/8 inch hole to be drilled out for that knockout. So go ahead and grab my hole saw and the drill, and let's get that done. Okay, so this is the Z Counterform by Concrete Countertop Solutions faucet plug. And so basically we're going to use the hole saw, cut a hole, and this goes in through the bottom, and it should fit perfectly. And then the height of this should sit perfectly flush with the top of the form, so when we screed it and trowel, this top of this form right here should just barely be visible. And when it's all cured, it should pop out through the bottom pretty easily. So let's go get to it. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and drill our hole. Again, it's a 2 5/8 inch hole for that faucet plug. I am measured back about 4 inches from the back of the sink. My faucet is 8-inch reach, so with that, the faucet will hit basically kind of right in the center of the drain here, and that'll give me, again, a 2.5 inches of solid concrete then between the sink and where this hole is. So that's what I am going with. All right, so then this should go in through the bottom. All right, so you just want to make sure the bottom flange of that adapter is flush against the back side of your cement board to make sure it's up, so where when you screed, this will be at the appropriate height. So that looks good, easy enough. All right, so that's quick and easy. So far so good. Moving on to the next step, we need to get the countertop concrete forms on. I am using the forms that I purchased from Concrete Countertop Solutions. I am using the standard straight edge countertop forms with the rock face inserts in them. And so my overhang is about 1.5 inches plus the overhang of the form, which is another 1.5 inches. So there's 3 inches of overhang. But the rock face form or form liner takes up about 1/4 or so inch in there, and so really my overhang is going to be about 2 3/4 in that ballpark when it's all said and done. And then that will give me about 1.25 inches to 2 inches for my stone, and still leave a pretty nice overhang and reveal for the countertop. So that's what I've gone with. So let me go grab the countertop forms, and let's get started with that. So the next step is to go ahead and get the forms on around the perimeter. And I am using the Concrete Countertop Solutions straight edge forms. And to measure these forms is pretty easy. You're just going to grab a piece of the form, and then you're going to put it up against your edge, and then you're going to mark a line, as I've done here, where that edge is. And then you're going to do the opposite over here and draw a line, and you're going to do that on every corner that you have. And then you can very easily measure from this crossing point intersection to this intersection point, and that'll get you the inside distance of your form. And so mine was 45 1/4, so I went ahead and just cut this one first, as a demonstration. And once we put it on, we can line it up with that intersection. And then you can see now we have it down there, and we can screw this into place. And then it's just a matter of doing the 3 remaining sides. And my long sides here are 8 feet, which is the exact same length of the forms. And so once you account for the miter, it ends up being 8 feet 3 inches. And so I am going to have to splice in a small piece on the ends. And so most likely, we'll see what I do as I go here, but most likely what I'll do is cut it back a foot at 7, so I have a little bit bigger piece, and go ahead and put the splices on this side down there and that side down there. That way when I put my form liners in, my splices for the form liners will be down here, so my splices for the form liners and the forms aren't on the same side. So that's the plan anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the camera. We'll go ahead and get this one installed, see how it goes, and then get the rest in. Let's see what happens. Okay, and for installing this, I'm using just stainless steel panhead screws. I'm using 1/2 inch on these forms on the side because it's a 1/2 inch cement board, and I don't want the screw to go through and drill into my supporting wood, otherwise I won't be able to get the wood out when I'm done. So I'm going to use a little bit shorter screw, and I hope it should still secure this well enough for the pour. So let's see. All right, so got that all done. Pretty easy. So I had forgotten these forms are actually 90 inches instead of 8 inches. They recently changed that for shipping reasons. And so I ended up just having a bigger gap here anyway. So ended up just using the remaining piece I cut for one of these sides. And that fit in there well. So again, I used these stainless steel panhead screws. They worked well, low torque. They're in there pretty strong. So, really to finish prepping the forms for concrete, what I'll end up doing is caulking these seams, putting tape, some duct tape on the outside to make sure every exterior seam is sealed with a couple layers of duct tape. You don't want it leaking out. Same thing with these corners. So the corners did pretty well, not too shabby, but you can see, you know, they're not going to be tight, and so you want to line these up and go ahead and put some duct tape around these edges to hold these corners tight while you pour, otherwise they'll open up on you. So I'm going to do that on all the corners, caulk any bigger gaps just to make sure, but that's really about it for these forms. So the next step in the prep to go ahead and prepare is to get the mesh down. And now I'm using the Concrete Countertop Solutions Liquicrete solution. And so in that solution they have a fiberglass mesh that you roll out and install on some individual stands that you install it on. So that's really our next step. So I'll go grab that and let's get started. All right, so went ahead, quickly vacuumed off the surface and grabbed our mesh reinforcement and our mesh standoffs. So quick show what these are. So this is just a fiberglass mesh that you put inside the forms, and so you want it to kind of go to the edge of where your form drops off. So kind of line it up there, and that's where your first stand will go. And you're supposed to just line these legs up. One second. And you're supposed to just line these legs up with the mesh like that. That's it. And then once you've done that, there's just a little tiny hole that you attach it with that's offset, which is useful because it lines with the hole, the grid adjacent. So you just put a number 10 5/8 screw through that. You start the first one right about here and roll it out, and it's easy enough that you can just use your standard shears to cut through this. So we're going to do one roll here, cut around the sink, cut around the knockout, then we're going to come back and do another roll here, and they should overlap just a little bit, and that should be it. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I got the second roll of the fiber mesh ready to go. Have all the standoffs installed, but before I put that on and cut it out for the sink, I need to put on the sink form, and I'm using the Countertop Solutions, Concrete Countertop Solutions flexible form that you stick on the inside of your sink. So I'll show you in a moment, but before we do that, I need to know how high to set that form off the sink, because ideally the form around your sink is the exact same height as the form, so when you screed it across, it'll all be flat. So to do that, all you need to do is put a straight edge along your forms, and then just use a tape measure and measure up to that bottom of the straight edge. You can see I'm just under, just under 1.5 inches there. So I'm just going to cut a piece of 2x4 at that height, and then I can just run the 2x4 along the sink, that cut piece, as I'm putting the form on, and the form should be at the right height all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the form and cut that little piece of 2x4, and we'll be back. All right, back at the sink. So we got the block cut, ready to go, and we've got the sink form. And so this sink form will go kind of inside your sink and attach it with the adhesive that's under this strip here. And so the idea is that you put it at the appropriate height and bend it around your corners of your sink. It is flexible, but it's still pretty rigid. So I think what I'm going to do is try and use my wife's hair blower, but don't tell her, and try to heat the plastic up enough to where it's going to bend around these tight radiuses a little bit easier. So that's the plan anyway, and I'm going to try and use a little bit of tape to hold it in place as I go, because I need to cut it to size, and I got to kind of figure out the size before I take the tape or the adhesive backing off. And so I'm going to try and tape it in place as I go, and then mark my cut line, and then take it back off and cut it. So we'll see how it goes. so we got her done. Hair dryer worked well. Heat gun probably would work even better. It's a pretty tight radius sink, and so you can see I still got a little gap on these corners, but we'll caulk that, and that'll just kind of overhang the sink a little bit. Not too terribly concerned about that. If it was an inside job sink, I probably wouldn't be exactly happy with it. It's not the forms problem, it's just a little bit cool out right now. And the hair dryer worked okay, but it was still pretty difficult to get these tight radiuses. You can see I got a pretty big gap here that I'm going to have to caulk. And there's a slight bend, a little bit of a bow in the form. So if it's inside, I probably would have spent more time, but I would definitely probably not be happy with that outcome. But outside, we're rolling with it. You can see here my measurement was a little bit off on the pre-fit, about 3/4 of an inch short, so I had to cut a little piece and fill that in. I'm going to duct tape the back of this, probably put a little bit of caulk in those gaps just to try to smooth it out a little bit. But again, once it's done, we're going to sand that down smooth, so it shouldn't be a big issue. And also the reason why you put those gaps on the front of your sink and not in the back of your sink, so you have to stare at it every single time. My height looks pretty good all the way around. Pretty happy with it. Helps if I hold the block the right way. So overall, I think we're ready. So I'm going to go ahead and duct tape this up, get it ready, and then we're going to move on to the mesh. I'm going to go ahead and lay over the top, cut the sink out, screw it down, get everything cleaned up, and then we're moving on to getting the form liners installed, and then we are ready to pour. Let's get to it. All right, so a couple tips on installing this mesh and kind of to where I've gotten so far. So first thing is, you can see how on this one I put those clips on the cement board. On the first row I put them up on this track, and on the second one I decided not to do that. When you put it on the track like this, it raises it up that 1/8 inch or so, and it gets this closer to the surface, and there's some strands that kind of stray out here on these edges, and I'm worried that one of those is going to get poked up into the surface of the countertop. And so I elected not to put them on the edge on the second one and just put it on the cement board only, which seems fine. It holds fine. There's plenty of grip there. So I've seen them on the videos put it on the edge, and I just don't know if it's necessary. The other thing that I found out the hard way, and I think this is in the instructions, but again, I maybe didn't read the instructions as well as I should have, is when you're rolling the fabric, the mesh out, it's easy to roll out and you cut it, but once you roll it out, flip it over, and so the natural curl in the roll points down. You can see in the first one, you can see these two rows look very different. This one has it's nice and flush, it points down a little bit, very, very nice. This one is wavy, it's kind of pointing up, it's all over the place. So what happened is I put this one, I unrolled it, cut it, and just put it down, and so it wants to naturally curl up, which is a pain, because you don't want this sticking up through your finish. And so I might actually come through here and put another couple clips in just to make sure they secure down. With this roll, I rolled it out, cut it, then I flipped it over, and so it's just so much better because you don't have to worry about that curl coming up to your surface, and it just works so much better. And here, I did that on both sides. You can see down here, and you can just kind of see the natural curl that it wants to come up. Again, it's still not to the surface, but it's pretty close, and so I might get more clips in there to hold those down just to make sure I don't have any issues. And the other thing is, my local store, they say to use 5/8 inch screws. My local store did not have them. I used number 10 1/2 inch because I didn't want them to go all the way through. My only other option was 3/4 inch, and those were too big, too long for me, my purpose. So I used 1/2 inch, and I will say they are screwed in nice and tight.
They're not going anywhere, because once you get this poured, they're locked in there anyway. So really you just need them strong enough to hold the tension of the mesh until the concrete sets. Then the other tip when you're putting this in, I would personally, what I did was put some mesh clips in here, screw it on straight, and then I pulled tension, came down here to the other side and pulled these tight. Once I have all of them on, all the clips where you want them, screw those in first, and then pull this tight so it doesn't sag, and then screw this end down, and then you can go through and pulling it tight and positioning them as you go. So now what you end up with is a nice tight fabric instead of really, really loose, because what you don't want to have happen is when you pour, this fabric go down to the bottom. You want it to stay where it's at. And if you don't stretch this out and get it tight, it's going to want to sag all the way to the bottom, and then you're going to be fighting pulling it up the whole time when you're pouring, and that just adds time, complexity, and mess to the process. So try and think about that as you're putting it on. Otherwise, wear gloves working with this. I did not. It is glass, and now I have some shards or some pokies in my thumb because I didn't wear any gloves, so just be aware of that. Otherwise, I think that is it. So far it's been pretty easy, pretty straightforward, a couple hours of prep work. What's left is the forms, so the open face rock split edge on here, and so those are going to be super simple. I just drop in with tape. Hopefully I can cut them easily with a knife on the corners, and at that point we should be ready to pour some concrete. So more to come. All right, moving on here, but apologize for the wind. It's not cooperating today, but we're moving on. We have now the form liners are going in, and I've got most of them cut and just ready to get the last one in. So I want to show you kind of how I do that. So to really install them, get them ready for concrete, you're just going to need your liner, cut the size, some double-sided tape, some rubbing alcohol, and a cotton ball or a rag or something. So set up camera here. All right, so to do this, first you need a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a cotton swab, and you're just going to rub down both surfaces with that, and doing this removes any of the oils or anything on there that might prevent the tape from sticking. All right. Now once you have that, you're going to grab your double-sided tape, and we're just going to apply the tape to the form liner. All right, press that on. All right, so now we just start at one end, drop the liner in, we're going to work at one end and work towards the other, pressing the liner down into the form as you go to make sure it's tight against the bottom. All right, then go back through and press both of them together firmly, and And that's all there's to it. So at this point, the liner's in, but there's a few more steps we need to do before we pour. And so in some of the corners, even though you cut them nice, you're going to have two forms that just don't, where the pattern just doesn't line up. And you see this one's much bigger than this one, and that transition is not going to look good on the finished product. So to fix that, you use some plumber's putty. So I'll show you what we do. All right, so to kind of get that ready for your concrete, don't use caulk. Caulk will be too messy to apply. You're gonna get it all over your other stone face, and it's going to smooth out, end up smoothing out a lot more than you want. And it's not very moldable. So plumber's putty, I find, is the ideal product to use for this. It'll mold, it's going to form to what you need, but it's going to come off very easily when you take the forms off. So we're just going to take a little bit, depending on how big of a transition you have, depends on how much you need to grab. So we're just going to start off, we're just going to put it into the transition, and I'm just going to press it in with my finger, and I'm just going to pack it into that joint a little bit, trying to prevent it from spreading out more than we need it to. We don't want it to spread on the sides of these other forms, because then it's going to just remove more of the rock face pattern. Grab a little bit more, pack it in, rub it over the top like that, and then there we have it. And you want to leave it kind of bumpy and not very uniform, because you want it to kind of look like it's part of the original mold. And so once you're done, kind of blend it in with the pieces that's beside it. Make sure there's no gaps for concrete to get behind it. Blend it, and there you are. That's it. That is ready for concrete.
All right, well, that wraps up the prep work to get this island ready for concrete. Just to kind of recap what we did, we got the supports on, we got the forms installed, we got the sink installed, cut out, we got the faucet knockout in, got the form around the sink, used foam in the sink to prevent the concrete from falling in. We got the rock face liners installed on the forms. Then all the seams, we used some plumber's putty. So we are ready for concrete. All right, so that wraps this up. Everyone, thanks for watching. Make sure, come back, check out the pour video, and see how the concrete countertop turns out. Thanks for watching.